Hi there. Recently, I was at a user group meeting and I had a lot of people come to me and say they're having to overcut audio to do a proper audio turnover out of Premiere. Or they've been working with their sound engineer and their sound engineer is saying there's just no way to relink to the original source files. And the reality of it is the problem is not typically at the end of the process. What is going on here is a lack of metadata from the very beginning. Now, to be clear, this video is really focused on people who deal with professional level production where the audio is going to be handled outside of editorial. And in a lot of cases, the files that you're editing are not the camera original files, but mezzanine files in a format like ProRes or DNX that have been processed maybe with some color information burned into them and then handed to editorial. So if you're somebody who produces everything within Premiere Pro and stays within Creative Cloud, this is not the video for you. This is really geared towards those higher end workflows where you want to be able to effectively take your edit and hand it off to a sound engineer or hand it off to a colorist. And the key to doing that, the key to getting things out of Premiere and getting them into these other applications is metadata. If the metadata is missing, it's just not going to happen. I'm going to show one example here where I'm actually going to import the original sound rolls with the dailies, and I'm going to sync them up and use those for editing purposes. But this methodology will also work if somebody is processing your files and they're just kind of baking in a mix track from the original sound rolls. The key is making sure that you have the metadata in Premiere. And if you don't, you need to ask for it. Dailies are expensive. And generally speaking, if you don't ask for certain things, they're not going to give you certain data, certain information in those files. And there's also an awareness that we have to build up for something called an ALE file. ALE files are known in the Avid world really, really well. It stands for Avid Log Exchange, but a lot of people are unaware that Premiere can read and work with ALE files. So to get started, what I'm going to do here to start with is just talk briefly about the project panel. And inside the project panel, you know that we have all these different columns of metadata that are available here. Not a lot of people go in and actually play with the customization of these columns, but these columns can be customized. There's many, many more values of metadata that can exist in your media than show up by default here inside of the project panel. And the other thing is you can actually organize these into different views using this view preset function that you see here. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm just going to add a couple of columns here by right-clicking on the file column header, and I'm going to go to metadata display. And here's where I can go in and I can actually search all of the different metadata that can exist inside of a Premiere Pro project. I'm just going to type in the word sound really quickly. And you'll see that there are values here for sound roll and sound timecode. I'm going to add those properties in. And I'll go ahead and click OK, just so we can see that those get added to the end here. I can see sound timecode and I can see sound rolls. And now I'm also going to go in, let me go back to that screen. And just for completeness, I'm also going to type in LUT, L-U-T, just to bring up the different LUT columns here. Now, this is something that's useful if you're dealing with any type of baked in color into dailies. You can actually see the LUT information, and Premiere can also pass that information over to the colorist when you're turning over for color. Now, there's one other set of columns that I also want to quickly showcase. I'm going to go to metadata display again, and this time I'm going to add in something called ASC, and you'll see that there's a couple of these ASC columns. These deal with a different type of color information, something called a color decision list, and we'll talk more about that later, but just know that these are values. Sometimes the colorist needs to know these values. Sometimes you want to be able to pass that information across, and if you're seeing it here in Premiere, it means that when you use interchange formats, those can show up. Now, let me go into a folder here. And this folder has a bunch of different files in it. It's got different A cam and B cam shots, as well as the original sound rolls. And if I scroll through some of the different metadata here, you can see that some of these actually have different LUTs attached to them and different shot and scene names attached to them. Now, this metadata can manually be typed into the Premiere columns. That's really, really time consuming, particularly if you're on a fast turnaround show. So the secret to how this metadata can get into these files, not everything can be embedded into the file header in a .mov file. A lot of times you have to have some way of managing that metadata as a separate file. That's where ALE files come in. Now, a .ale file is actually just a tab delimited spreadsheet, similar to a CSV file, but it's got some custom organization at the very top. The header of the spreadsheet has to be in an exact specific order for it to work as an ALE file. You can right-click on an ALE file and say open in a text editor, and by doing that, you'll typically get something that looks a little bit like this. It can be really difficult in any text editor to really get the columns to kind of line up the way you want because these are just separated out by tabs. But this is somewhat readable human-wise. I can kind of come in here and start to see a little bit of what's in here. I can at least quickly check which columns are coming across. Now, it's also possible to open up an ALE file in something like Excel. This might be a better way of looking at this, just because this gives me more organized columns. Just be aware that sometimes tools like Excel can really mess up the ALE compatibility. I'm not sure why that is. This is just a text document, but there's some special formatting that has to be done on the header columns and rows. And for some reason, a lot of the spreadsheet tools like Google Docs or Microsoft Office can kind of screw that up sometimes. If that ever happens, I just wanted you to also be aware that there are tools out there. This is one that I've used before. It actually allows you to rewrite an ALE file. It allows you to take things like a CSV formatted file, comma separated value file, and convert it into an ALE file. So if you do searches on things like ALE tools or ALE converter, you're going to find various websites that have this type of functionality. And it's a great way of getting in and fixing something. If for some reason Premiere is not recognizing it as an ALE, this is how you would actually go through and fix it. All right. So what does it look like to actually use an ALE file in Premiere? Well, I'm going to start by creating a new project in my dailies here. We'll call this day 09. And now I have a blank new project. Now, the key to using the ALE file is to import it first. When you import an ALE file into Premiere, it's going to give you a series of basically offline files. So I'm going to go to my dailies demo here, and I've got an ALE file listed down at the bottom here, footprintsday1.ale. I'm just going to go ahead and double click on this. And you'll see that this brings in a whole series of clips, but these clips are currently knocked offline. That's fine. All I have to do is select these clips, relink, and this is the important part. If file path is a blank column in the ALE file, you're not going to get file name and file path showing up here. If these show up blank, you need to go back to the person who generated the ALE file for you and say, hey, I'm missing the file path column. They just have to check which columns are going to go into the ALE, which metadata that you need. And you need to be able to ask for that. You need to be able to recognize that. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, that looks good there. I'll say locate. I'm just going to go to my folder that I have here, and we'll go into media. I've got the display only exact name matches set up, so it's only showing me one clip, and that's the clip that it needs to look for. And just like that, I've got all the different clips imported in a couple of simple steps. Now, if I bring this up full screen, you'll already see that there's interesting metadata information in here that wasn't, or you wouldn't be able to find this inside of the the QuickTime files. Tape name shows up on some of these files. That's actually very, very important. I'll explain why in just a minute. Log notes actually show up in here. So that's something that can be added in by the DIT. They can actually merge in a log note column and get those notes from the assistants or the producers. Scene and shot information can come across in here. And let's go ahead and right-click metadata display. And we're going to go ahead and type in sound. So we have sound roll and sound timecode information. And we'll go ahead and click OK on that. And now at the end here, I've got those two columns. Now I'm going to put up a graphic here just showing it's a table that shows the different columns that Premiere supports when it comes to ALE files. So not every column is going to translate over into Premiere, but the important thing is the most common columns are going to transfer across. And this includes things like sound roll and sound timecode. Those are key values that we need to have in the files in order to properly turn over the sound and let a sound engineer then take in that multi-track 8 microphone sound file and match it up to the single track or 2-track file that existed in the Premiere Pro timeline. If the metadata is there, it's a quick and easy process for them. If it's not there, it means you're probably going to be tasked with hours of having to overcut the audio and put the original sound rolls in and add tracks and do all of that management to get it so that everything is in there. All the actual wave audio playback is actually in the timeline. And that's just so time consuming. Now, in my example on the screen right now, I don't see any sound roll information. That's because in my workflow today, I'm importing the original sound rolls. That is an option. These files are 4 or 5 channel broadcast wave files, and I can actually sync them inside of Premiere. If you're syncing picture and sound, you don't necessarily need to worry about the sound timecode columns. If you are just bringing in dailies that have the sound file baked in, but you know for certain that there was second system audio, double check this. Make sure that you see a sound timecode value. Make sure that you see a sound roll value when you finish this process of using the ALE. Now, before I forget, I wanted to make sure and cover why the tape name column is kind of crucial inside of an ALE. And that has to do with situations where you may not get all the metadata that you need the first time. There have been times, and I've seen this on a number of different films, where the first couple of days of dailies are actually missing important metadata, and it doesn't, in the rush of trying to get things going, and you've got a lead editor waiting for the first day of dailies to come in to start cutting a scene, sometimes all the metadata doesn't make it over. And there is a mechanism in Premiere to allow you to add that metadata after the fact and not have to do it clip by clip by clip. And what this is it's called the update metadata function. The way update metadata works is inside of the ALE file, we actually use a column called tape name to help to line up and match up this, and the actual file path are used to line up and compare one ALE file to another. And in this way, we can actually add metadata inside of Premiere. And the way this kind of looks over in Premiere, let me go ahead and switch back over to Premiere here. I've got a bin open right now, and basically what I would do in this situation, if I was missing certain metadata, I can just select the clips in question that are missing the metadata and come up to Clip, Update Metadata. And at this point, I would point at an updated ALE file, like maybe this one in this circumstance. Now, that's all I would need to do. Premiere is going to use the tape name column, and it's going to use the file path column with the actual name on disk of each of the different clips, and it's going to use those to align, and it will basically replace any existing metadata to what it finds in the new updated ALE. That's a key differentiating factor. It is replacing all of the metadata columns. So this is something that you want to make sure that your updated ALE contains everything that your previous ALE had and just has additional information added to it. Okay, let's get back to where we were. Now from here, as far as synchronization is concerned, I'm not going to go too deep into this. Best practices is to always use multicam for syncing, even if you're just syncing a single camera and a single wave file. It's best to use multicam for doing that. So if I just wanted Greatness 9A and I just wanted the sound roll information, I could just select these two items and then say create a multi-camera source sequence. And I can sync these either based on in and out points or time code. If my clips had a scratch track of audio, I could synchronize them based on audio. And I also, you'll notice here, I have this ability to sync on sound time code. If you get into a situation, and this does happen, where the lead editor says, I'm not really happy with the mix track the Dailies provided, but I got you the original sound rolls, you now have to be able to match to that. So in that situation, I would actually sync on sound time code, since that sound time code would be baked into the Dailies that were provided before. So just know that that's also an option. In this case, I can just sync based on time code. The source, the sound rolls and the picture were jam synced together. So we'll just sync that based on that. And just like that, I've created a single multicam that you'll see here. And this multicam has matched picture and sound. I can just double check that by looking at the clipboard, doing a quick playback, and I can hear, yes, it's synchronizing, and we're pretty well good to go. Now, one other thing just to note if you're using this workflow, it's never a good idea to take a multicam and drag it and drop it onto the new item button to make your sequence. You should be aware of what your frame rate resolution are of your dailies. But if you do this, it can do weird stuff with the audio. This multicam has a bunch of audio tracks. You can see that this is actually set up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 audio tracks. And it can do some weird routing, some what we call adaptive tracks, some stuff that you wouldn't want. If you absolutely need to, you don't want to bother looking up and finding a sequence based on actually knowing the frame rate and the resolution, you can roll your mouse over one of these clips and you'll see that information comes up in a tooltip. But you could take one of the original picture files to make your editing sequence and then just delete it so that you can bring in that multicam effectively with all the different channels of audio. And now I've brought this in. It's going to work and act like a single unit. I can still see the names of the different, here's 9A, A1, A2, A1 through A5. There's all the different clips. And here's the single camera that I'm cutting with. So that is one way of working. One other additional step to be aware of, if you use this methodology and the lead editor says, I don't need this all right now, I still want to be able to just cut this in without having to turn on and off all these different source patching buttons each and every time I load one of these multicams. You can also right-click on a multicam, modify the audio channels, and instead of coming in as 5 channels, set this to 1, and then set this to whatever track that you want to have pass through. So if the mix that I want to work with is on A5, I can do that. If the mix is on A1, I could do this. So this is more getting into the editing side of things, but this is why working with one of these multicams, you can make it really, really easy. I can drag and drop this in. I can insert it. A1 comes in by default. I only have the one source patching item here, But the cool thing is in the timeline, I can Alt or Option drag down. And by doing that, you see it brought in a separate track there. And then I could actually right click on this, choose audio channels, and make this a separate channel. So now if I zoom out to these, you can see that the first channel is channel 1 in the multicam. This is now coming in as channel 2 in the multicam. Different audio. So it still gives an editor the ability to access all 5 of these tracks, but they don't have the tedium of having to turn off all the additional source selection in the timeline. So that's another kind of cool thing. Now, stay tuned for another video. This has gotten a little bit longer than I think I anticipated doing, but stay tuned for another video that actually is going to get into and cover the actual turnover process, where we go through and show how to simplify the sequence down, make sure that mono content is on mono tracks, stereo content is on stereo tracks, and then actually output an ALE file. So if you follow this workflow, if you use multicam for sync, if you double check your metadata and you use the ALE importing method, you'll make sure that you have all the necessary information there for any Pro Tools artist to use what's called a field recorder guide track workflow, where they can easily match back to the original sound rolls. I hope this helps. Thank you so much.